think nobody ever really thinks about that, but they did in order to work to be part of the court. He had to be a eunuch. They threatened to kill him. Look what they did with his compatriots, you know. But yet, look what he did. Look what he gave us. And look what he did. We can do it. We can do it. So turn to Hosea, the book of Hosea, chapter 4. Yes, ma'am. I'm going to get to that.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to get to that. One of the things I do, like I've said before, my husband and I are deans of the yeshiva. And I do inductive Bible study. And I don't know if any of you have ever been part of an inductive Bible study. But it is... Okay. An inductive Bible study is where you take, first of all, you take only the Word. You glean from the Word. And after you have gleaned absolutely everything you can from the Word, then you can go to a commentary. But what that allows you to do is once you have the Word, then these commentaries won't sway you. I mean, how many times have you read one commentary that tells you one thing, and then read another commentary that tells you something else, and then somebody else tells you something else? They're opinions of man. So, once you get that Word in you, then you have that discernment to say, oh, that just doesn't quite sit right. But you do it through parties. Is everybody familiar with the term parties? It's an acronym for the Jewish levels of learning. And it's PRDS, parties. The first one is, the Peshat level. Peshat is the literal level. What does the word say? Just what does the word say? Don't go thinking about anything else. It's just what does the word say? And once you've looked at that, then it starts bringing up some questions. How many times have you read something and said, gee, I need to find out about that, and we're going to do some of that tonight. I've got to find out a little bit more about that. The next level is the Resh level. That's the hint that there's something deeper there. I need to find out. There's something deeper than just the words. I need to find that out. The Dresh is the search. It's the hunt for the deeper level. Then the Sod is, you'll hear some people say it's the mystical. I think it's how it applies to our daily life. Because learning has not taken place unless behavior or our thoughts have changed. Learning doesn't take place, and that's happened. So when we go to the Word, we know that it changes our mind, it changes our heart, it changes our perspective. So when that happens, then we've gone full course. We've gone from, well, this is what it says, to, gosh, there has to be more, to the hunt for the deeper meaning, to now, how do I apply that deeper meaning to my life? And we're going to do that tonight. I'm going to give you a little glimpse of that. A little PR is that this study is actually available online. We did it at the yeshiva. It's a 12-week study, and it's available online if anybody is interested in taking it. So as we start, I want us to know, first of all, that Hosea was a prophet. We all know that, right? So who did he speak for? This is going to be interactive. Although we're taping, I will repeat your answers so they can hear. Who did he speak for? He spoke for Yahweh, didn't he? He spoke for God. So he only spoke what God told him to speak. This wasn't something that he came up with by looking at the world around him. We come up with some really strange things when we look at the world around us, don't we? Especially today. I mean, the news, right? It doesn't matter what channel you turn to, or even what you watch on the internet. It's depressing, isn't it? You go to the newspapers. I don't even read a newspaper anymore because it's, anyway, it's like sifting through garbage, you know.
They're also biased.
They are. And there's not one good report. I keep looking for a good report, you know, and it's like they want to suck all the goodness out of the world by telling the world all how bad it is. But we know that Yahweh himself spoke to Hosea, and he was speaking to Hosea about the knowledge and the position of his people Israel at this time. So as we begin, I want to look at it because keep your ears open because it's such a profound message for us today. Profound message for us. So let's start, and I have Hosea chapter 4 verses 1 through 6 printed out for you so that you can follow. I've double spaced them because a lot of people like to make notes, and it's really kind of nice to make the note wherever wherever you find the thing that you want to kind of tickle your memory about. Well, I want us to begin by reading verses 1 through 3. And this first time, I'm going to read them out loud. Just follow along with me. And I'm going to read it very slowly and very clearly because we're looking at, remember, we're going to do the initial one, which is the Peshat. We want to look at what the literal meaning of these words are. And it says, and I'm reading from the New American Standard Bible. I hope all of you know, a little sidetrack, I'll take a rabbi trail. I hope all of you know the difference between the different kinds of Bibles. Shake your heads yes or no. Okay, so you know that there are translations, there's transliterations, and then there is commentary type Bibles, right? I use the New American Standard Bible when I study because I think it's the closest thing that you can get to a really great translation. If you use a transliteration, they sometimes take liberty, and you'll find that there's some issues with a transliteration. A commentary type is great to read. I love to read the Message Bible. I really like to read the Message, but I would never study from it. And you can always tell because in the very first pages it will tell you if it is a translation, a transliteration, or more of a commentary type Bible. So I'm using the New American Standard. And the first 3 verses out of here, am I going to read all? Verse 3. It says, listen. I want you to listen really close. Listen to the word of the Lord, O sons of Israel. For the Lord has a case against the inhabitants of the land, or knowledge, because there is no faithfulness or kindness or knowledge of God in the land. There is swearing, deception, murder, stealing, and adultery. They employ violence, so that bloodshed follows bloodshed. Therefore the land mourns, and everyone who lives in it languishes, along with the beasts of the field and the birds of the sky, and also the fish of the sea disappear. Does that kind of sound familiar? It sounds like it could be our times, couldn't it? It sounds like it could actually be where we're living now. Well, again, we're going to talk about the 4 levels of Hebraic learning. I want to introduce you to that thought because whenever we look at scriptures, we should, there's a difference between reading it for reading its sake and then reading it to learn, to understand, and to bury it in your heart. So those 4 levels are really important. I've given you some space on the back of your sheet if you would like to write any of these down. In the Peshat level, again, this is the literal meaning, and we discover the literal meaning by asking questions of the text. Who, what, where, when, why, and how. I call it the 5 W's and an H. Who, when, where, why. Who, when, where, why, what, and how. And when we ask those questions, that's when we start thinking about it. Now, you don't need your imagination to answer these questions. We don't want to go in there and say, well, yeah, I think this says this, or, oh, I think this says that. We're looking for the literal meaning of the text. And again, this is called the Peshat. Now, when we're looking at it, we want to look and we want to start documenting the observations that we made. We want to ask those questions of the text because that's the only way that we're going to get to where we make it applicable to ourselves. So let's ask some of those questions. Who is speaking? You've got it there in front of you. Who is speaking? Hosea But who was speaking through him? Yahweh, God. So we have God speaking to Hosea, who then is talking to the people. So it's like a direct line from God. Now we have the word today. We still have prophets. But remember, we're supposed to test the prophets that we have today. So Yahweh, again, is speaking through the prophet Hosea, to whom was God and Hosea, I'll get it out. Hosea speaking. It tells us, who was he speaking to?
The people of Israel.
Absolutely. He was speaking to the sons of Israel, wasn't he? The inhabitants of the land. So he's speaking to his own people. God is saying, I am speaking to my people that I have put in my land. And this is what I want you to tell them. Okay? What was the reason that Yahweh was speaking to his people?
To instruct him or edify them, one of the two.
Well, instruct and edify, but in this particular case, he uses a specific word. What is it? I have a case. I have a case against you. Yes.
Yeah, see, in my NIV it says charge.
It's
It says because the Lord has a charge to bring against you.
that.
So that would be the same.
Nah, the original Hebrew word is a legal term, and it's a legal term that says, I'm bringing you into court because you've committed something, and I have a legal right to have you in court.
So like charging you with a felony or
Yes.
something.
But you know, again, that wording does not hold the strength. It doesn't hold the weight that I think that having a legal case against you would.
I'll have to go back to my NAS. I have
Yeah.
I have the NIV and NAS.
Yeah, I always use my NAS to study. But it's a legal case. So God, Yahweh, Jehovah, is saying to Hosea, you go tell my sons, the sons of Israel that are living in the land that I put them in, that I have a legal case against you. You have committed something. You have done something that allows me to say, I have a legal case against you. Now, that's pretty strong. I mean, I wouldn't want Jehovah saying to me, Carol, I have a legal case against you, and I'm just about ready to tell you all about it. I think I would be cringing. You know, I'd be down on my face, say, whatever it is, Lord, I'm sorry. You know, I don't know what it is, but whatever it is, Lord, I'm sorry. But he's getting ready to address his people and tell them what this charge is. Now, it's a legal or personal charge or a case. And in the Hebrew, the word used here is reb, R-E-E-B. And it means a legal term. A legal term. Well, okay, we're off to a great start. You know, so far it looks like the sons of Israel aren't really doing what they should be doing. And it looks like that something they've done has really caused an issue with Jehovah himself. So let's go a little bit farther. Why did Yahweh have a case against these people? The answers are right there. What are they? There was what? No faithfulness, no kindness, and a lot of sin we saw, didn't we? But in that first verse, we see that there's no faithfulness and there's no kindness. Now, that's saying something pretty strong, isn't it? But there's another one that's even more so. What's in that next phrase? Knowledge. Knowledge of who?
Of the Lord. Of God. His characters.
That is something. He says in verse 1, because, he's going to state very clearly why he has that case. Because there's no faithfulness or kindness or knowledge of God in the land. Now, I would not want to stand in front of Yahweh and have him say to me, Carol, in you there is no kindness, there's no faithfulness, and there's no knowledge of God in you.
That's a horrible report.
Isn't that? I mean, that's pretty strong. He's not sugarcoating it in any way, is he? He's laying it out.
It's not a little bit, there's none.
None. Yeah, it doesn't say you're lacking in. It says there's none. There is no kindness, there is no faithfulness, and there is no knowledge of me in your land. Now, that is pretty strong. And we're going to look a little bit closer of that. If I were going to take and make a theme for that verse, my theme would be, there is no knowledge of God in the land. Now, we just asked a couple of questions, but it's a lot. Did it make more of an impact on you when we asked the questions than it did if you had just read it? It makes you kind of focus in on it, doesn't it? So now we know that there's a huge issue going along. Now, what I've done in your handout is when I do an inductive study, I look for keywords and phrases. A key word or a key phrase is something that if you would take out of the text, it changes the meaning of the text entirely. And that the rest of the verse or the rest of the passage kind of focuses on that. Well, I looked at that and I said, well, definitely a key word is knowledge. So I colored a specific color. And I colored yours green so that you can see it when you look at it. Now, I've got a red line through it. Whenever we see a line through something, what does that usually mean to us? It's missing, or don't do that, correct?
Take out.
Yeah, take out. So I'm saying there is no knowledge. There is no knowledge. So it's a visual. So whenever I look at this verse, that'll catch my eye. So I've done that for you. That is part of the inductive study process. Now, also, we noticed that there's going to be other keywords. No kindness and no faithfulness are key words as well, because that is a buildup to no knowledge.
Makes sense, yeah.
It does, doesn't it? It absolutely makes sense. Because if they had knowledge of God, would there be faithfulness?
Yes.
Or at least some sort of it, wouldn't it? If they had kindness, would there be some sort of knowledge? But there's none. Absolutely none. Now, again, let's look at some more of the questions. Another W question. Where was this happening?
In the land.
In the land. In the land. In the land that God had given them. The land that Abraham was given. Now, that's even sadder, don't you say? I mean, this land was given to Abraham, to Yaakov, and to Isaac, right? To Abraham, Isaac, and to Jacob. It was handed down. It was to be theirs forever. But they had a responsibility. They were to keep the covenant, right? Now, Hosea was written after Torah. So there had been already some institution of what God wanted his people to do. And again, we see that there is something really lacking here. So I want us to read this one more time because I want us to get the idea of exactly what is happening. It says, "Listen to the word of the Lord, O sons of Israel, for the Lord has a case against the inhabitants of the land." He had brought them in to the promised land. They were living in the promised land that he had given to Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov, right? And they were living there. They were flourishing there. They were receiving all of these blessings. And then we go on to say, because even though you're living in my land that I have given you with rich blessings, guess what? there is no faithfulness or kindness or knowledge of me in the land. Can you imagine God using the first person pronoun and saying, in this land that I have given you, in this land that I have blessed you with, in this land that I have given to the patriarchs, and because of the patriarchs I have given it to you, but there's no knowledge of me in that land. In my own land, there's no knowledge of me. That's pretty overwhelming, isn't it? It really is. And we just have that from the first verse. Don't ever say that the Tanakh or the Old Testament doesn't speak to us today. You know, it speaks to us in overwhelming information. Absolutely. Now, again, we mark the lack of knowledge. I want us to include some information when we look at this lack of knowledge. Again, there's the 5 W's and an H that we're going to look at. Now, knowledge, faithfulness, and kindness are heart issues. I can't show you faithfulness. If I were to look at you, I can't see faithfulness. If I were to look at you, I can't see faithfulness. If I look at you, I can't see kindness. They're heart issues that are acted out through bodily actions. What? You're giving her a bad time? I looked right at Lupe and said you. They're heart issues. They're heart issues. So Yahweh is addressing the heart issues of his own people. Now, are you beginning to see, gosh, he could be speaking to us today? I mean, this book has 2017, United States of America, written all over it. It really does. And they had no knowledge of whom? We talked about that. Yahweh. They had no knowledge of God. Now, that is, again, to me, absolutely amazing. When you think of the Israelites, you know, you think of them as maybe not always doing what they should be doing, but at least having a basic knowledge. But God himself says, you have no knowledge of me. No personal heart knowledge of me. Maybe they were going through actions. Maybe they were going to synagogue. Maybe they were celebrating the feasts. Maybe they were doing things, checking it off the list, but there was no heart involvement in it. No heart.
Just a ritual and a show.
Yeah, or habit.
Well, that was very similar to my upbringing in the Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm.
We, as a child, I didn't know what I was doing. We didn't even have, our missal was interpreting the Latin. The priest would speak in Latin, and our missal was putting it in English, but just what he was saying. We didn't study the Bible. They told us what to believe, what to do. I did everything as rituals. I had no idea what I knew that there was a God, and I, believed in Jesus and God, so I had that foundation, but I really did not know anything else. I did it in rituals.
Oh, that's true. In fact, for centuries, it was forbidden for Catholics to ever hold
Yes.
the Bible.
Oh yeah, my dad was told that when he was in school.
Yeah.
You can't look at the Bible.
Well, there's still a lot of people today, congregations today, that don't think that their congregants can interpret the Bible for themselves. There really is. Let's go teach them. I agree with you 100%. Actually, my life verse is 2 Timothy 2:15. Study to show thyself a workman approved unto God, rightly discerning the word. And my mission in life is to provide people with the tools so that they can discern the word for themselves. So many people want to study, they want to learn, but they don't have any tools. They read the word, which is amazing, but it's like, how do I get the meat? How do I get the meat? Where's the knives and forks? How do I get in there?
We didn't have a Bible. I didn't read a Bible till years later when I finally, became saved and all that. But I had no idea what was in the Bible. They didn't let us have a Bible.
But we have a responsibility. Let's go back to 2 Timothy 2:15. Let's look at the pronouns in that. This is always a thing I always tell people. The pronouns in that is not you, they, them, or others. It's study to show yourself a workman approved unto God, rightly discerning the word. When I stand before my Maker and he says to me, Carol, did you study so that you could discern my word? I'm going to say, yes, Lord. Yes, Lord, I studied. But so many people leave it up to, we sit in a pew and we're fed, and we're fed regurgitated information. We're fed information that may be revelation to the pastors, but it's not my revelation. This word is a revelation to me. It's a love story, a love letter written to me by my God, by my Creator. And every verse in here is mine. Now, I laughingly say that sometimes I look for the asterisk. An asterisk means look at the bottom for a note. And I want to see down there, this applies to everybody else in the world but Carol Foster. But yet, so far, I haven't found one of those. I keep looking, but I haven't found one. So that means that his word applies to me, right? So Hosea applies to us today too, doesn't it?
The Bible is basic instruction before leaving earth.
There you go. There you go. Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I want us to go on a little bit, and I want us to read verses 4 through 6. Now, remember he talked about the fact that nobody is faithful, nobody has kindness, and no one has the knowledge of God. Then we have some verses. We have verse 2 and 3, but I want us to go directly now to verses 4 through 6, and we're going to come back to the others. So even though this happens, it says, yet let no one find fault and let none offer reproof. For your people are like those who contend with the priest. Now this is kind of a backhanded comment. Have you ever talked to somebody and said, well, no one understands that this is wrong? And that's not what we really mean, is it? We really mean that everybody in the world does not realize that this is a wrong statement. But it's kind of a backhanded, and that's what he's saying here. Let no one find fault and let none offer reproof. Everybody sees what's going on. No one sees anything wrong with it, and no one is willing to stand up and say, hey, we're going the wrong direction here. For your people are like those who contend with the priest. That word contend means quarrel, argue, ignore, or to view with disgust. Says, so because of that, you will stumble by day, and the prophet also will stumble with you by night, and I will destroy your mother. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected knowledge, I will also reject you from being my priest. Since you have forgotten the law of your God, I will also forget your children. Now, how many of you have read that and really listened to it when you've read it? Because of what they're doing, the mother is going to be destroyed, and we're going to talk about who the mother is. But it says, I will forget your children. Now, that is a pretty strong statement, isn't it? Have you ever thought that maybe because we have so many prodigals, how many of you have prodigals out there? Children prodigals. I'm the only one that has a child that's running amok or is a believer but is not currently walking in the way? Well, God bless you all, because I've got
one child.
You got rid of your prodigal one. They're all out on their own, doing their own thing. They're all believers, but they're not walking the way they should be walking. And so it kind of makes you think, doesn't it? It really does. It says that because they lack knowledge, they will be destroyed.
Oh, that happened to me before I came to the Lord. I was destroyed from my sin nature. I followed all the things in the world.
You know, isn't that true? And sometimes he loves us so much, he lets us go as far as we have to go before we come back to him. You know, and, you know, like Pastor Bruce always tells us, Lord, I want you to deal with my prodigals, but be gentle. You know, be gentle. Be gentle with them. So, yes, and not only are they destroyed for lack of knowledge, but we just read that they rejected the knowledge. They had it, and they rejected it. Now that's a scary thought. A really scary thought. Now, kind of keep in your mind, this is the first day of the year 5778, and all the stuff that's going on around the world. Just keep that in mind as we continue to read. And we also see again that Yahweh is saying this, and he's using personal pronouns. Now, I love it. The prophet does not say, God said to tell me this. He says, I will, my people, my priests. He's using a first person pronoun. I am God. I am saying this. And you are my people. And again, he says, I will forget your children and I will destroy your mother. These people, what had they done? Not only did they had no kindness, they had no mercy, and they had no knowledge, but what else? What else did we just read that they had done?
Violence, bloodshed, stealing, adultery, murder, deception, swearing.
They were running amok.
Those are characteristics of the devil.
Right. But they had also had the law, they had the knowledge, they had Torah, and what had they done? They rejected it. They had rejected it. And they had not only rejected it, but they had rejected it so far back that now they had forgotten it. They had now...
Passed on to their children because each generation probably just kept rejecting.
That's exactly what we see right now. And I want to make sure I get what you said on the video. That because each generation, because of the rejection, each generation forgot a little bit, to where now their children have no knowledge.
It's kind of like what they're trying to do with history nowadays. They're trying to tear down monuments. They're trying to erase things from books. They're trying to erase history and rewrite it, and that's probably what was. So if you keep doing that with each generation, taking a little bit away,
That's right.
the next generation a little bit more, eventually we won't have any history
Nope.
at all, no knowledge of anything that ever
Nope.
happened.
That is a wonderful statement, because if we forget our history, the mistakes that we made will be repeated. Absolutely. And we can see that with the history of Israel. If you follow through the Tanakh, you know, everything is secular. We all know that there's a difference in the Hebraic mindset and the Greek mindset. A Greek mindset is linear. I'm going to start this, it's going to stop here, and it'll never be addressed again. That's our Greek mind thought. You know, check it off my list. Never have to address it again, right? My to-do list. But a Hebraic thought is secular. And it keeps going round and round and round, kind of like around that mountain. And those of us that have really contemplated our lives, sometimes we feel like we've gone around that mountain before. It's, Lord, hurry up and show me, because I don't want to go around this mountain again. I don't want to see this again, right? But what happens is that, let's look at the Jewish history. They are rescued by God. They are blessed. They are returned to their land. The land prospers. They multiply. They grow. They become a real force in the world. Then they get cocky. They reject some of God's commandments because they say, well, you know, we don't want to offend somebody. Right? We've got all these people around us, you know, we don't want to offend anybody, so, you know, that's not that important, we won't do it. Or we'll do it, but, you know, it doesn't really mean that much. Each generation waters it down and waters it down and waters it down till they get to the point where they've rejected it and they have no knowledge. Then God sends a prophet like Hosea, like Yirmiyahu, like, you know, all the other prophets, and he says to them, wake up, people. Wake up, because if you do not, this is going to happen. Hosea actually says that if you do not turn back, God is going to put a hook in your jaw and drag you away naked. And that's what happened. So, but he says to them, okay, please turn back to me. 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 And they basically thumb their nose at him.
I can only please for so long, and just like Pharaoh, you know, hard is hard.
Well, and it does just...
You refuse to let it in your heart. You refuse to let the Spirit in. You want to run your own show.
And it's just like you said earlier. He lets them go as far as they have to go before they turn back. So he takes them into captivity. He takes them to Assyria. He takes them to Egypt. He takes them to Babylon. He takes them into captivity where they have nothing. They have no land. They have nothing. And guess what? They do an about-face, and they turn back to God.
Well, that's been happening through the earthquakes. They've noticed that people were forming groups, or Bibles have been showing up, and it could be that these people were turning away, and this was God's way of shaking them and saying, hello, I'm here.
Do you know that after 9/11, the increase in church attendance was absolutely astounding for a while. For a while. And then it goes back. But this is that secular events in history that keep repeating itself. So we see then that Hosea as God is saying through Hosea, I'm warning you. I'm laying out to you what's going on and where you're at, where your heart is at. And I want you to do something about it. But he goes on. He goes on to tell you more. Now, again, we have just looked at the resh. We looked at the resh, which is what? We looked at the pashat, which is the literal. We looked at the resh. There's a hint. There's got to be more. I mean, he's telling us this, but there's got to be more that we can find. Let's ask some more questions. Let's dig a little bit deeper. Let's do some cross-references. Let's do some word studies. Let's see what that really means. That's the inductive study process. So let's do a few minutes of word study. And again, anything you want to write on the back, that's fine. And if you would happen to want my notes, if you'll let me know, I will email you my notes. You know, nobody, if you're teaching and you have a calling from God and you want to impart God's word and you want people to go, I need to know more, then you want to share. So I'm more than willing to share my notes. So let's look at this. So we've done the pashat. We've looked at the resh, which says there's got to be a little bit more here. So let's go to the drash, which is the hunt. Sure. CAMORTENSEN@msn.com. So let's look at some word studies here. Now, you'll notice on your sheet that I gave you, and for those online, if you'll contact me, I'll be more than happy to email you the worksheet that we're working with here tonight. Next to the word knowledge, in the upper right hand, do you see the little letter, the number up there?
H.
Now, how many of you, let's make sure I've got all my stuff up here. Where'd I put it? I ate it. What is that number?
You have two different numbers. 1847.
It's 1847, isn't it?
Yep.
And you're right. It comes from Strong's. It comes from the Strong's.
What about the blue letter Bible?
You know, I use the eSword
Yeah, that one's it.
because it will also give you, if you put your cursor over it, it'll also give you that number. But this comes from Strong's. This says that the original word is Hebrew. If that was a G, that would mean that they're taking it from the Greek. But this is from the Hebrew. And the number is 1847. So you can take a Strong's and you can go to, make sure you're in the Hebrew side, go to 1847 and it will give you that information. Now, 1847 is translated, I want to tell you about eSword. It's ESWORD. Doug likes Q Bible, which is another one that's free. Q Bible is not downloadable, so anything you do in Q Bible has to stay online. eSword is downloadable. It is an amazing app, very, very user-friendly, has multiple translations. It even has the Young's literal translation, and it has a Hebrew Old Testament in it, Tanakh in it, which is really nice. And it also gives you, you have a Strong's, you have a Webster's, you have all kinds of things within it. Now, they do ask that if you would give a donation, $5, but the program would probably be $60, $70 if you didn't do that. And I'll tell you a little secret. When I was in Bible college, you can copy and paste out of that puppy. And it will copy the Hebrew. Now, this was before I knew Hebrew. It would copy the Hebrew, and I could paste it right in my notes that I would turn in, and I got extra points. So if you're turning points in or turning stuff in for that, you get extra points for that. But it made it really nice because I could go to the original word, and it'll give you the verb, it'll give you the tense, the mood, and the voice. You know, our English is very limited. We have past tense, present tense, and future tense, and that's about all we have in our language. Hebrew has a voice, it has multiple tenses, and it has moods. So when you start studying it, you can say, okay, this word means it happened once. That's it. Never happened again. Happened one time. Or the same word in a different tense says it means happen now, but it applies to everything in the past. And there's another tense of the same word that says it happened now, but it applies to the past and will apply to the future. So I could take the word saved, right? I'm saved. And one tense means at one particular time in my life, I gave my life to Jesus Christ. I am saved. It happened once. I don't need to be saved again, right? Another tense of the same word can mean I am saved from all my past sins. They've been washed away. The same word means I am saved past and future. So it's so important when you start really getting into that drash level of what does the word really say. So let's take a stab at some of these words. Now, the word in Hebrew, I have such a hard time keeping track of my pens. The word in Hebrew, and I'm not going to write it in Hebrew, but I will write it in a transliteration. Can you see that? It's da'ath. D-A, comma, or apostrophe, A-T-H, da'ath. And it means wisdom, discernment, or understanding. So whenever we see that knowledge there, it's not just knowledge. It also means wisdom. It means understanding as well as knowledge. So it gives us a much broader concept of what the author is trying to say. You know, we're so limited in our English. If somebody speaks another language, they'll tell you that English is one of the hardest languages to learn because our words are so finite, and they don't follow the normal pattern of Latin or Greek or Hebrew or any of those other languages. So they actually tell you it's the hardest language that there is to learn. Now, if we did the same thing for faithfulness, what's the number for faithfulness? Let's put this out here. This is knowledge. So what's the number for faithfulness? I didn't put one on there? Oh, 1,000 lashes. It's H539.
I don't think you'd be alive.
No, I wouldn't. With a wet noodle. I forgot to add that. With a wet noodle.
The wet noodle would break the fall apart.
And this word is faithfulness, and it is pronounced E-M. I can never remember that. E-M-T-H, I think. E-H-M. Okay, E-H-M-E-T-H. Ameth.
Faithfulness.
That's a word for faithfulness. Now, we translate it faithfulness. When we think faithfulness, we have a concept. I'm going to be true to something. Isn't that usually what we think when we think of faithfulness? The Hebrew word ethmeth really means to have certainty, truth, trustworthiness, assurance, establishment, faithful, right, true, and absolute surety. Now, if I were to put in some of those words, and we're going to do that in a minute, in our place of our finite faithfulness, is going to open up that scripture for us to see what God is really telling us. Now, the other one we want to look at is, let me put this out here. Faithfulness. Now, what's the other one? Kindness. Now, how many of you know what the word for kindness is? Hesed. Hesed. I can get my Hesed. Now, this number, I hope I put it out there. If not, it's H1614. Now, this isn't just being kind to somebody. Hesed is God's kindness. Whenever we see loving kindness in the scripture, that word is hesed. But not only is it loving kindness, it's mercy, goodness, grace, and loving kindness. Compassion. That's all those characteristics of God tied up in the word hesed. So when we see that, we say, well, and you have no kindness, we're again limiting what that word means by putting our English translation on it. So they say, well, kindness is about the best we can get, but this is God's loving kindness, God's grace, God's mercy. So if we were to read this one more time, and this is what I do, I put what I just found into that scripture because I want what Yahweh told me. And he speaks Hebrew, believe it or not. And I think that that's a holy language. And I really think when he comes back during the millennium, I think we're all going to be speaking Hebrew. I really do.
Yeah, not going to be English.
Well, it may be one of those miracles that happened like at Pentecost, that everybody will understand everybody. But I'll tell you what, he speaks Hebrew. You know, he speaks Hebrew. So if I were to put these verses into what we just learned, it would read like this. And I want you to listen because this is what he's really saying to us. Listen to the word of the Lord, O sons of Israel, for the Lord has a legal case against the inhabitants of his land, because there's no certainty, trustworthiness, faith, or establishment, because you are not displaying any examples of my loving kindness, my mercy, or my goodness in the land, nor is there any wisdom, knowledge, or discernment of God in the land. Now, that's pretty harsh.
That's real harsh.
That's pretty harsh. But that's what he was telling the sons of Israel. Now, does it remind you of another land?
Yeah, this one.
Maybe our land, doesn't it?
Probably all lands. China's that way, every land's that way.
But how would you like to have the creator of the universe saying that over our land? Maybe he is. Maybe he is.
We just doomed ourselves.
Well, but we're going to find that we have hope. God never leaves us without hope and a way. There's nothing that has come into our lives that he has not provided a way and a means. Yes, ma'am.
I just have a question. What's your take on where North Korea, I mean, why he's constantly making threats, and now we're sending threats, and is that kind of maybe Satan working through that?
I think Hasatan is at work in an amazing way in this world today. And remember that there are no leaders or no governments that stand without his permission.
So this might be part of what's supposed to happen.
I think that God has a plan and a purpose, and we may never know it. You know, I always say, well, that's one of the questions I'm going to ask him. I got a tablet of things I'm going to ask him when I get there. You know, did Adam have a belly button? I mean, now some of these questions, right?
I never thought of that.
But will it really matter when we get there? Will it really matter?
I think we'll know it when we get there.
We're going to be in the presence of the King of the universe.
I think we won't even need to ask.
I don't think we'll even need to ask him. I mean, what would it matter?
All that's going to go away once you get there, because none of that stuff in the past will matter.
Well, and then look. If you want to look right now, Russia is saying that if we do anything disruptive in Syria, then they're going to come against the United States. But do you see this turmoil? Do you see this whirlwind that's going on in our world today? And I personally think it's because there's no knowledge of God in the world today.
They're not going to do anything to us. You know, you don't have to worry about Russia. You don't have to worry about China. The United States is super powerful.
We used to be.
No, we are. We are. You don't. You know, unless you're really up to it, you would not believe the things we have.
Well,
Now, we don't even.
Oh, they can take
Well-
out North Korea in a
Oh, they can take out Russia.
you know,
Take out China.
my dad spent 28 years in the service flying fighters and B-52s. I know what we've got.
They're like glider planes to what we have.
You know, and we have the missiles, we have all those kind of things, but we don't have detente. I don't think we really have detente anymore because we've watered our word down. And what we have said, we didn't follow up on. So I think that detente has lost a lot of its power, but we still are a world's power. But let's yes.
Quickly, remember when they said when we go into the Arab lands, the Arabs are going to, the Muslims are going to rise up in the streets and do all this stuff? Didn't even happen. It's not gonna happen.
Well, they're too busy working over here right now. That's my opinion. That's just my opinion. That's just my opinion. So if there is no knowledge, there is no wisdom, there is no kindness, no faithfulness in the land, then what was there in the land?
Everything opposite of that.
Absolutely right. Let's go back and read those verses that we want to read 2 through 3. Now remember, we just said that there's no faithfulness, no kindness, or no knowledge of God in the land. What there is swearing, deception, murder, stealing, and adultery. Violence, so that bloodshed follows bloodshed. Now, if I were doing this study at home, this is what I would be doing. And again, I'm giving you tools, right, that you can take and use in your own study. I would say that what does lack of knowledge of God, because that's basically what it is. What does that cause? Because there is, there's no faithfulness, there's no kindness, and there's no knowledge. And why is there no faithfulness and no kindness? Because there is no knowledge, right? So what does lack of knowledge, what does that look like? Well, what does it say? Give me some answers out of the Word. Remember, that's what we want to do, is we want to go to the Word.
Corruption.
Okay, out of the Word. Swearing. That's exactly what it says, isn't there? Lack of knowledge. We see that there's swearing. What else is there? Deception. What else? Murder. Adultery. Is there stealing there? Stealing. What else? Violence. Now, not only just violence, but bloodshed follows bloodshed, doesn't it? Doesn't it say that? That bloodshed will follow bloodshed. That means, now, I'm going to use an analogy. Street gangs. Someone sheds blood over here. This group says, aha, because you shed some of our blood, we're going to shed some of your blood. Oh, you shed some of our blood, we're going to shed some of your blood. Hatfields and McCoys. Nations are now doing that. Look what's happening in the Middle East.
The mafia was like that.
Well, some of it still is, they say.
I'm half Sicilian.
Okay. But do you see? Do you see what happens when there's no knowledge of God? Now, did we put down adultery? We have sexual sin. What have we got going on right now in our world? Abortion. Everything is topsy-turvy. Everything is upside down. Have you read recently that in England now it's okay that if you have a child, you do not have to declare its sex on the birth certificate? That the child can now, whenever they get to be however they want to be, can declare what they are.
Oh my God.
Now that is an abomination.
That's going on. That is now law in Canada.
In Canada as well. How about the I won't mention even a state, but that a school district, pre-K, this little child went to school and he was decided that he wanted to be treated like a little girl. So he came home and said, my teachers called me him or he. The parents filed a lawsuit against the school district, and it is now a law that you cannot address a child by a sexual identity pronoun. So what do you call it? An it?
Yes.
Insane. I haven't
You
heard
might as
that.
well call that.
I mean, can you imagine that? Do you know that there is a 7-year-old child in New York that's undergoing gender reassignment? 7 years old.
No.
Kids don't know.
Pretty common, and they're getting
parents are
the
doing
switch,
this.
and then they're getting they feel like the next month or whatever
Something else.
they did it, and then they can't. It's a big problem, I guess, with
Well, have you ever, I mean, come on, all of us. I was the world's biggest tomboy. My dad was part Native American. I'm a quarter. So I hunted, I fished. I can gut a deer and skin a deer and butcher a deer and get fish with the best of them.
I learned how to shoot when I was 13 with my dad.
Yeah. But that doesn't mean that I want to be a boy,
Yeah.
right?
and how we can teach, how we can
It's all going to be going back to God. That's the only answer.
if they don't allow you to.
Well, we as believers have to change that. We as believers have to change that.
All of God's judgment where He gives people over to a debased mind.
That's right.
Continue to turn away.
That's right.
You want to be like this?
Be my guest, right? How about now? This is one that's really close to my heart. And if I'm offending anybody out in TV or out in internet land, I apologize. But we, as American citizens, are paying for people to go into the military, primarily for the purpose of sex re-identification, whatever they call it, reassignment, so that they then can go out after 4 years. Now, these people cannot serve in the service because they're undergoing all these surgeries.
Oh, sick.
But, stop and think about this. If, in fact, a man was serving, he transgendered, or what do they call it, and was now a woman, he would still have the muscles and the stature of a man. That doesn't change.
The bone structure stays.
Now, there is a wrestling team in Wisconsin that now has a girl on it that's wrestling men because she's undergoing sex reassignment. So we have gone beyond this in our culture, haven't we?
It seems like it's Sodom and Gomorrah, how all of these things, the violence and the mistreating the stranger, gets turned over to the sexual sins and so forth. It seems like this is the same pattern. I mean, it's not mentioning the sexual sins here, but it's obviously applying.
It applies, doesn't it? Absolutely.
Sexual sins, it seems like it all. Everything always ends up in the sexual area.
And I'm going to end it with that topic with one more comment. It is now legal in one of the states of our United States of America to marry your pet.
You're kidding.
Well, it's got to be California.
Yes.
It's got to be.
Is it California? They won't.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Seeing probably Oregon or dogs may be identified as like a dog mom or a dog dad.
Is it California?
Dog parents. I think now they're wanting to be recognized. Like if they rescue a dog, basically saying that's the same as rescuing
No,
a child or adopting a child.
Oregon.
We've really run amok, haven't we? We have really run amok.
Like way off.
But we're not. We are no better than them they were back then. I think we've even gotten farther down the road.
You can see all the stickers and decals of who saved who, and I'd rather be with a dog than a human. Between, you know,
So
blah, blah.
what state is it?
I didn't say.
Oh, she's keeping.
But it says also then that not only does that happen, but what happens to their land? The land mourns and languishes. Now, can a land mourn? Apparently so. The land mourns and it languishes. It does not thrive. It languishes. What has happened to our farmers' crops? What has happened to the agricultural economy of the United States? It's really bad. Do you know the government even pays farmers now not to raise wheat, not to raise cattle?
Or it was pawned it off in other countries. It's left our land, and now we get most of our stuff from Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, all of our food stuff from there.
Yeah, the avocado industry here in California, most of it's moved out of Chile.
I'm getting really depressed here.
Oh, no, but I'm going to tell you the good news. I'm going to tell you the good news. But can you imagine? That's what Yahweh is saying to us. Look at what's happening to your nation, to your country, to my people. It should depress you.
I didn't know some of these things.
It should depress you. So we...
The water district, they're no longer charging the agricultural price for water for the roads, and now they just had to change it to residential prices for it. So what
Well, we have a friend who just lost 90 avocado trees to a pestilence. Yeah. Okay, so the land mourns and languishes, but go on, look at those other two verses. What else happens? What happens to the people that live in the land? They languish too, don't they? They languish too. Now, what else happens? Not only does the people languish and the land languish, but what happens to the beasts of the field? Beasts of the field, the birds of the air, and the fish in the sea.
When you think about the curse of the land and how it's associated with people, like with Adam, obviously being made out of the dust of the earth, and that it seems this connection God always has.
Absolutely.
Now, I was watching something where one of the most toxic things for our land is actually pig's blood. That pork in our nation, they have nowhere to put the blood, so they put it in. They form large lakes down in the south.
Ugh.
So they make lakes, and so it's seeping where it flooded, where all those hurricanes blew through, and flooded it. It picked up the blood, and it made it go in streams, and it killed all the fish and all the birds, and people started, they did like a 20-mile radius, they were all getting the same types of cancer.
Ugh.
Yeah, all because of the pig's blood. It turned all the rivers red.
Because of greed.
But you know, when Adam and Eve sinned, the first thing that was cursed was the ground. The land was cursed. Then they were cursed. So God and his creation has always meshed the two together. So we see that the lack of knowledge, right? The lack of faithfulness, the lack of kindness brings about, and of course no knowledge of God, brings about things that are outside the human realm. The land mourns, and all of creation mourns at this time. Now, not only that, but they're arguing with God's people, or God's priests. He says, you quarrel. He says, you contend with them. You quarrel. You complain. You cause issues. You state falsehoods. You do all these things with God's priests. So, those that are representing God on earth, Yahweh on earth, are now being treated contemptuously. So we really see an issue going on in the world at that time, don't we? I mean,
Giving everybody a dose of their own medicine is what you're doing.
he's turning them over to the results of their own actions. Absolutely. So, I want us to look at verse 5. So because of that, you will stumble by day. That means you're going to not just stumble and fall. That's not what it means. It means that you're going to stumble in everything that you do. It means that you are going to try to do something and you will fail. You will have a goal and you'll never be able to attain that goal. You will stumble during the day. But the next one is so important, because part of the stumbling is that you will do out and out sin. You know what God said, you rejected it, and you're going to be just like Adam said, I ate that apple and I'm going to do it again. Now that's haughtiness. I mean, that's kind of thumbing your nose in the face of God again, isn't it? What? About Adam? The words there, if you go back and you look at the original language, it's not just that that Adam took the apple and he ate and he said, well, it's this woman's fault. You gave me this woman and she gave it to me and I ate it. The tense and the mood of that verb says, I ate it and I'm going to eat it again. Now, that's something to think about, isn't it? So it's that same type of an attitude. You know, our attitudes haven't changed. You know, we think that we've evolved. We really haven't. We really haven't. But the next part is even worse, believe it or not, but it's going to get better. I promise you it's going to get better. It says, and the prophet, the one that's foretelling, who's supposed to be the leader, the one that's supposed to be guiding you, the one that's supposed to be telling you what Yahweh wants of you, he stumbles with you at night. The priests, the religious leaders, were living double lives. One thing comes out of their mouth during the day, and another through their actions at night.
That was the Catholic Church. A lot of the priests, they take off their robes on weekends. My dad ran into a priest somewhere at a bar somewhere, and the guy says, yeah, I got to get up early tomorrow and do mass. The priest sitting there drinking.
Well, all we have to do, and we're not going to discuss it, but all we have to do is look at some of the well-known figures that we have had in the past, and we see that our priests, or those that were supposed to be leading us religiously, has fallen. So we see that not only are the people stumbling, but the priests are stumbling as well. And it says, I will destroy your mother. The term mother here is not a physical mother. Do you have any idea what it is? Say it louder. Motherland. Because you have done this, I will destroy your land. I will destroy your land because of what you've done. You have no knowledge of me. You've rejected me. You're flat out being defiant of me. I will destroy your land. And he did. He put the hook in their jaw, and he took them naked to Babylon. That's some serious shame. When we were in Rome, we actually saw the Ark of Titus. Now, do you all know that Titus was a general that destroyed the temple, and he took the captives to Rome, and they had a huge parade. I mean, they had this huge parade to honor him, and he brought the Jewish captives into Rome, and he brought them in chained to each other. Because again, everything is cyclic, isn't it? We don't learn from our mistakes. Well, not only that, it says, I will reject your land. I will take you out from your land. Your land will no longer be yours. But it says, I will also do what to your children? What will it do to your children? I will forget your children. The promises that were given to Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov will be forgotten for a period of time. He will forget his children. Now, once they turn back to him, and if you read the book of Hosea, it says, but he pleads with them. But if you will return to me, I will be your God again, and you will be my children, and I will restore your land. I will be like the mother bear protecting her cub. And then in the next verse, or the next verses, he says, if you don't, I will be like the lion, and I will rip you to shreds.
Get ripped to shreds. That was the one.
But are you beginning to see such a correlation between where we are in the year 5778 and where Hosea was as he addressed his people? Are you seeing the correlation? Now, that can be a real downer. And I promised you I would not leave us on a downer, didn't I?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, well, how can we as individuals help make some changes? Because it sounds, it's just so out of control that I don't know if we can even go back.
We're no longer ignorant.
I'm going to give you a Tanakh verse, and I'm going to give you a Brit Hadashah. Tanakh, of course, is what most people call the Old Testament. Brit Hadashah is the renewed covenant. If you see the New Testament, that is a terrible translation. It is the renewed covenant. I'm going to give you 2 verses that we as believers in Yeshua, we as children of Yahweh, are we children of Yahweh? Absolutely. We are children of Yahweh. We can stand on because his promises are yea and amen. Correct? Amen. Okay, if you have your word with you, turn to 2 Chronicles chapter 7. Because I think these 2 verses is God's message to the United States today.
Find it. Where is that?
2 Chronicles? No. No, it isn't. It's in the Tanakh. It's in the Old Testament.
Okay.
There you go. There you go.
All right. I'm not finding it here. Let's see.
First and Second Kings, First and Second Chronicles.
What chapter and verse?
Chapter 7, verses 13 and 14. And if you speak really loud so that the audio picks you up, would you read it? Whoever has it.
If I shut up heaven that there be no rain, or if I command the locusts to devour the land, or if I send pestilence among my people, if my people which are called by my name shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, and I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin and will heal their land.
Can you repeat second?
It's 2 Chronicles chapter 7, verses 13 and 14. He's saying that even if I do this, even if this is what my plan is, so even if he says, I'm going to destroy your mother and I'm going to forget your children, he says, even if that's my plan for you because of your disobedience and your rejection, he says, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then, now I'm an if and then person, then I will hear from heaven. And what's he going to do? I will forgive their sin and I will heal their land. When we see an if and a then, that is an action and a promise, or it could be a result of something. So we have a responsibility. If we're God's people, right, we have a responsibility, don't we? What are we supposed to do? If we want things to change,
We have to change.
we have to change. We have to humble ourselves. We need to know, be aware of what's going on around us. How many people today are oblivious to the sin in this land?
Or they think it's okay.
Or they think it's okay.
That's the interesting thing is all this is really coming on us because we're the ones that shouldn't let it happen and that are supposed to be guarding over all this. And
We're his people. We're his people, just like Israel was his people then, and they did not do what they're supposed to do. Well, guess what? We as believers today did not do what we were supposed to do. Yeah, do you know one of the biggest lies that the church has told its people? Don't get involved.
I've never heard that.
You've never heard that? Don't get involved in politics because religion and politics should never match. Remember, we're just supposed to love everybody. Don't make waves. Accept everybody. Let everybody do their own thing.
We go along in order to get along.
You know, but we as a body of believers have done that.
And that is why we fail.
says you're not supposed to entangle yourself with the affairs of this world. It says that, I don't know what verse that is, but that's what God says. Don't entangle yourself with the affairs of this world.
The book of Yaakov, the book of James. The book of James is a wonderful book because one of the things in the very first chapter that I just love, it tells you the progression of sin. And this will actually tell us exactly why we've gotten to where we are today. Let me find that real quick. I wasn't going to do this, but you got me here. I will right here. It starts with verse 13 in chapter 1. It tells you what happens. Let no one say when he is tempted, I'm being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted by evil, and he himself does not tempt anyone. But, whenever you see that word, you need to circle it. But each one is tempted when he is carried away and enticed by his own lust. Then, when lust has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And when sin is accomplished, it brings forth death. Do not be deceived, my beloved brethren. So, what he's saying is that what happens is that God, first of all, God doesn't tempt. God may send trials to strengthen us, to prove us, to grow us, but he doesn't tempt us. But when we're tempted, and that temptation brings forth lust, and I'm going to use this example. Gosh, I would like a new car. There's nothing wrong with saying that, is there? There really isn't. There really isn't. My neighbor has a new car. There's nothing wrong with saying that. You know, I don't know why they've got the car and I don't have the car. Right? There's something wrong here. They've got the car and I don't have the car. I wish I had their car.
And nowadays they tell you to go take care of it.
That's lust. That's lust.
You're entitled.
I'm entitled to that car. Right. Give me your land because I'm entitled to it, right? I've heard that recently.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of
Okay.
people.
Then lust, once it's conceived, brings forth sin. Okay, how am I going to get that car? How am I going to get that car? Well, I know how I'm going to get that car. I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and that car is going to be mine. Brings forth sin. Sin brings forth death. That's where we are today. It may not be the car, but we have become so enthralled in the world and what the world has to offer that we've lost sight of who God is. Absolutely. Did you have your hand up? Okay. So that's that. But let's go back. So he's saying, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face. Now, seek my face doesn't mean warm a pew. There's a lot of people in the United States today that believe if you sit in a pew, you're seeking God's face. Now, that may be part of seeking God's face. But remember 2 Timothy 2:15. Study to show yourself approved. Has God given you a revelation from the Word recently?
Yes.
Yes. You've been seeking His face. He's spoken to you from the Word. Right?
But I find that the closer I try to get to God, the more the sin or the temptation of my flesh is always fighting against it. Just like
Because
Paul
that's
said.
Satan, doesn't he?
Well, that's my
trying to
sin.
get involved?
That's my sin nature.
Do you know,
Yeah, but Satan is coming after you.
if you don't, if you weren't growing, if you weren't maturing, if you weren't doing anything, you wouldn't be a threat. So I mean, sometimes we kind of need to rejoice.
Sometimes trials in our life is, there's something, I don't know what part in the Bible, but it's kind of like clay, like baking the clay. And more fire will develop a beautiful ceramic piece.
James again. James is one of my favorite books, right?
We have to go through the fire.
Yeah. Consider it all joy, my brethren, when you experience various trials. Not temptations, but trials. We're being refined. Because trials says, okay, do you trust me in this? I mean, that's what, if you read back in the book of Shemot, in the book of Exodus, that's what happened through the Exodus, is God sent trials to test his people to see if they really trusted him. So, but if we humble, if we pray, if we seek, then he will hear from heaven. And he will what? He will, excuse me, he will forgive their sin, and he will heal their land. Now that's an amazing promise. That's an amazing promise. Now that is from the Tanakh. But let's read from the Brit Hadashah. 1 John 1:9. Who's got that? That's Pastor's favorite verse. Pastor Bruce's, and it's one of mine.
If we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us of our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness.
If we confess our sins, he is faithful, right, to forgive and to cleanse. So we have both in the Tanakh and in the Brit Hadashah, we have the recipe, we have the prescription for healing our land. It's we, believers in Yahweh, who have the responsibility. Did you notice in 2 Chronicles it doesn't say if the unsaved, or if Joe Blow, or if the Canaanites, or the Jebusites, or any of the other ites would be humble themselves and seek his face. It says, if my people will humble themselves and pray and seek my face, then I will hear from heaven and I will heal their land. So we have a huge responsibility as believers. We have a huge responsibility. We're the only ones that can heal this land. Actually, we're the conduits. We're the only conduits through which Yahweh can heal this land. And that's by humbling ourselves, by, confessing our sins, by seeking his face. He will then heal our land. And our land is in such desperate need of healing.
Amen.
Isn't it? Desperate need of healing. Yes, sir.
I was thinking of that with Yom Kippur or with trumpets. The whole idea is to make Teshuvah, repent, and to get back to right standing. And the whole thing is about seeking God and forgiveness and everything. And isn't it amazing that what it would be a difference? What a difference it would make if the churches were actually keeping this feast, which God commands. And you think of what a difference our country would be.
Absolutely.
It's a huge thing just this week.
And even if you do it from the days of awe, the next 10 days, which are the real focal days, the next 10 days until Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement.
Everybody together,
Yes.
all together at the same time, repenting and getting right and seeking God for this week or this 10 days.
I have a little tidbit.
All Israel? Okay.
I have a little tidbit. We were down in the Jewish district a couple years ago, I guess, at Sukkot. They were getting ready for Sukkot, which if you haven't been down there, now's an amazing time to go because everyone's ordering their sukkahs and their measurements, and they're getting all their lulavs, and they're getting all their stuff. So we were down there, and we have a favorite store that we used to go to, Mitzvah 316. And we were in there, and the rabbi that owns the store was talking to this young couple, and this young girl and boy, and they had just made Aliyah. They had just gone to Israel and had come back. And he was talking to him, and he was all excited. And all of a sudden, he stops dead in his tracks. And he says, "Are you brother and sister?" And they said, "No." And he said, "And you're out without a parent?" And they said, "Yes." And all he said to them was, that's why our daughters get married early. And that's all he said. And then he went about his business. And then they left. And he turned to us. Now, we don't go in there and announce, we're goyim, we're messianic. We don't do that. But we were in there looking for books, and he said, I want to show you something. Do you know what's wrong with Israel? And I said, no. And he said, I'll show you why what's coming against Israel, why it is. And he opened up a Torah in Hebrew, because I have, he was reading it. And it says, and if you forsake me, violence, this verse, violence will come upon your land. Bloodshed upon bloodshed, right? And do you know what the word for violence is in Hebrew? Nobody knows? Okay, Hamas. Hamas is the Hebrew word for violence or bloodshed. Hamas will follow Hamas. He says, that's why. That's why. He says, because we, the chosen people of God, have forgotten him. Now, if a Jew can say that in their own land, what can we say here in the United States? I challenge you. I challenge you. In the last 10 days of awe. Now, we, during the whole 40 days of repentance, have been on our face before the Lord. And, I have my personal quiet time. And I'm on my face. I cover my head because this is my prayer shawl. When I'm covered by this, it's just God and I. Nobody else, just God and I. And I say, search my heart, O Lord. See if there be any wicked way within me. Tell me. And he has revealed things that I would never imagine. Bitterness from the time I was a child. Lord, forgive me. Forgive me for holding that offense. Forgive me. Forgive my attitude. He brings these things to mind because he wants me to meet him at Yom Kippur. Clean, white, washed, cleansed, and forgiven. So I challenge you, these next 10 days, these 10 days of awe, get with God. You don't have to get under a prayer shawl. You don't have to lay flat on your face. Get before God and ask him, Lord, show me my heart. Now, that's kind of dangerous because the word says our heart is incredulously wicked. But show me my heart so that I can repent, so that I can pray 2 Chronicles 7. I can pray 1 John 1:9, so that I can stand before you on Yom Kippur, on this Day of Atonement. And I can say, Lord, I am clean before you. You have made the atonement. Your blood is my atonement. So I can stand and rejoice and lift up my hands and shout. Because now I can come into his presence. Clean, fresh, white. If my people, right? If my people will humble themselves and pray and seek my face, then I will hear from heaven and I will heal their land. And that's our study for tonight. Thank you very much. Our study next week is going to be